whenever I need to like take a break, I will go to historical romance because it's like even though fantasy I think is, has some similarities with that, I don't write that genre. So I can completely shut down.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to BYOB, the Bring Your Own Book podcast. I'm Nikki.
And I'm Kelly.
Today, we are over the moon to be talking with the #1 New York Times and #1 international bestselling author of the From Blood and Ash series, Jennifer L. Armentrout. Not only has Amazon Studios recently optioned the series for a TV adaptation, but she was also one of the highest grossing authors of 2023, having released not one, not two, but 3 books this year. In early 2015, Jennifer was diagnosed with retinitis pigmentosa, a group of rare genetic disorders that involve a breakdown and death of cells in the retina, eventually resulting in loss of vision, among other complications. Due to this diagnosis, educating people on the varying degrees of blindness has become a passion of hers, right alongside writing, which she has plans to do as long as she can. When Jennifer isn't busy crafting one of our favorite romantasy worlds, she spends her time in Shepherdstown, West Virginia, with her husband, her border jack Apollo, border collie Artemis, 6 judgmental alpacas, 2 rude goats, and 5 fluffy sheep. Thank you so much for joining us, Jennifer.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I always laugh when people say the 6 judgmental alpacas because it's true. They are assholes.
You're living my Disney princess dream with all those animals, honestly. Like,
I don't know what the opposite of Disney is, but it's that when it comes to farm animals, especially alpacas. They are kind of like, somebody explained it to me that alpacas are like cats where if they want your attention, they'll let you know. If they don't, they're also let you know. They are not very people oriented animals. They tend to only like you if you have like a carrot in your hand. Then they're like, I'll be your best friend.
Oh
Lick
my
a
goodness.
conversation,
relatable.
eat this carrot.
Yeah, only come around for food. I get that.
Yes. Yes. Well, we are both so grateful and honored to have you here with us on BYOB. From Blood and Ash was one of the first books I read in the pandemic, and it made me rediscover my love of reading. Since then, I've told all of my friends, including Nikki, and even my non-reader husband to read From Blood and Ash so we could obsess over everything that goes down together. He read it and loved it, and he actually read it for us with us on the podcast because I was like, if you're going to read a romance, it's going to be this one. So I just wanted to quickly thank you for sharing your story with the world so that we could enjoy it with you. I also wanted to add that we want to keep this interview inclusive to all of your fans. So we're going to touch upon more than just your latest release. And when we get to spoilery questions, we will let everyone know because that's not fun.
And I just want to say thank you for sharing that. Like, one of the best things that you can hear as an author is that you either started their love of reading or you helped rejuvenate it because, that is so important. So thank you for sharing that. It's always an honor to hear that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I'm so happy to be here. I've like got to contain my joy because we have things to ask. so,
Yeah.
to start us off, can you tell us, this is a large question, but can you tell us what, if anything, originally inspired you to start writing From Blood and Ash?
So my inspiration from Blood and Ash makes absolutely no sense. I mean, it really does not. I was watching the 2016 Summer Olympics and I started, which I don't even know, like for some reason it just spawned this idea. And, I always been fascinated with Greek mythology, especially the myth of Atlantis. And, so that, I mean, I guess I could loosely stretch and tie that into the Olympics because, did they not start, I think, in Greek times? Like, maybe.
Yeah.
So, like, oh, yes, Olympus. Yeah, that makes sense. I think I'm right there. But like, it just came to me. And I know that when a lot of people ask, like, what's your inspiration? It's always so hard to answer because it's everything and nothing. It's like you find inspiration in the strangest places. And for me, it was that. but again, it was pulling in some of the stuff that I was always in love with, which Greek mythology. I think that is some of the most bizarre stuff to read. That's very entertaining, but also the myth of Atlantis. And I do think Disney kind of like ruined Atlantis a little bit because everybody thinks Atlantis is a city underneath the sea where, like, I don't know, mermaids swim around or something. And it's like, no, Atlantis, if it did exist, it everybody died. Like, like they didn't go down and start swimming around in the bubble. The city fell apart. And I remember falling down like this weird documentary about the search for Atlantis, and they had pretty much sided on, and this is what kind of increased this idea that Atlantis, or an idea of that, probably did exist. It wasn't obviously what it became, like this hugely advanced society, but they believed it was probably an island that was nearby and that had suffered something like earthquakes, during that time, because I do think there was historical records around the time that was spoken about that one of the islands did suffer. So they think it was probably based off of that. And you know how over time things get, elaborated upon. So it was like these types of like influences started to build the idea of there being this kingdom that people thought no longer existed. And it kind of spun out from there.
Wow.
And it started with the
Okay.
Olympics.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's so interesting because we were just talking before you joined us, and I was like, I feel like there's Greek inspiration here,
Mhm.
but I don't know if we'll have time to get into that. So that's awesome. That's so cool.
Yeah, I've always just been so fascinated with Greek mythology. And so there's sometimes it's kind of more like some of the inspiration's a little heavy-handed, and then other times it's, little tiny pieces of things.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's really nice. And to bounce off of that, something I'm very interested in about whenever we get to talk to an author is their writing process. You have a huge imagination and you're pushing out books like nobody's business, really. So I would love to hear what you do to stay focused, like what kind of rituals you have, places you like to write. Do you have a certain time of day? Is it like a schedule? Anything like that?
Well, there has to be a schedule. So I do have ADHD. So it's at some point it used to be really helpful to me, strangely, because not so much with so a lot of people when they think of ADHD, they think of obviously attention deficit, but there is a side part of that that's hyperfixation, and usually it's on something not helpful whatsoever. But when I first started writing, I would get hyper focused on it, like tunnel vision. I mean, Armageddon could be happening behind me and I would have like no idea. And that really helped. But then like, with most people who have that, like they will have years where you can kind of cope with it yourself. Like, certain techniques that you've learned to like keep your focus. And then there's always going to be a part where all that stops and you almost always have to kind of rely on medication at that point to kind of pull, your focus back in. But for me, I have to have a schedule and I have to start writing by a certain time. If I do not start writing by at least 11 o'clock, I am done for the entirety of the day. And I wish it wasn't like that. It didn't always was like that for me, but now I don't know what it is. Like, I feel like I wish I could understand what that is because I would like to stop it. But I have to be writing by that time. And typically I write until I finish like a chapter or a scene. And sometimes I can get that done by like a reasonable amount of times. And then other times it's like, you're stopping, at 7, 8 o'clock at night, later sometimes. But I have to keep that schedule because if I don't, I tend to like, I will find myself on Facebook. I will find myself like on YouTube again, like watching Brad Mondo bleach fails. It's like, which I cannot stop watching.
We've all been
Um,
there.
right. I feel like now I could like successfully like bleach other people's hair because I've learned what not to do over and over again. But like it's, I have to set that schedule and I have to hold myself accountable to it because if I don't, yeah, I'm not gonna get anything done.
Just to add to that, would you consider yourself like, are you a plotter or a pantser, as I think they call it?
Yes. So I like to call myself like somewhere in between. So I know how a book or series begins. I know where it should be again for the book in the middle and for the series, like where I should be at with the overall reaching arc of the series. And then I know how it ends. Everything else comes to me as I'm writing. And I like to do it that way because I could never sit down and plot out a book or even a book or a series all at once. Like I joke, but it's true. I'll get like performance anxiety because I'm like, I don't know. Like I feel like I have to explore the world or the story at that point to get me there. I do know I have author friends who can do like 60-page outlines. I am so envious of that. But I also know my personality. If I wrote 60-page outline, I would be like, well, I don't want to write this now. Like, you know what I mean? Because I would have spent all that time just doing that. So as I'm writing the rest, like stuff, the filler, and I hate to use that word filler because it's really not, but that kind of stuff comes to me as I'm writing. Sometimes that does take me off course a little bit because I'll get new ideas as I'm writing. Now, the overall art never really changes, but the way I get there can. And so that's good. It's also a little bit bad because you can get a little bit lost in the sauce of writing at that point. And you realize, oh crap, I have 200,000 words and I am nowhere near the end of this damn book. And at that point, I usually have to like stop. And then that's when I plot out the remaining chapters just so I know, like, what do I really need to have in this that I still need to cover? And, then that's when you start tweaking like pacing and, stuff like that. So it's a mixture of both. But I do wish, though, I could plot like some people do because I do think that makes your life easier.
I feel like I would be like, well, I just wrote the story.
Right. Yeah.
Why am I gonna do it again? I
Right.
have
I'll
a
be like,
short
well,
story right here.
can someone flesh this out for me? Because I just wrote everything else. Like it's just, yeah, I feel like I would lose interest. I mean, not that I know I would, because I just know my personality. I know
Yeah.
I would then lose interest.
Yeah.
It feels
Done. Next.
anticlimactic. Yeah.
Yeah. Who are some of your favorite authors? And also, what's a genre you love that maybe people wouldn't suspect from you?
So my favorite authors, that there's a lot that are current, but like whenever I like do this, like I always try to think about the ones that like inspired me to write, because I feel like even though I love a lot of the other authors now, these are the ones who I think are, the reason why I'm an author now. The author that spawned my love of writing is LJ Smith. And so if you're a youngin, you're probably not going to know who she is. But she wrote The Vampire Diaries. That was a book series that came out in the 90s. And, I know when the TV show came out, everyone was like, oh my gosh, it's like, y'all, this has been around for a while. And she also wrote The Secret Circle, which I love the book, not the TV show. I don't know what was happening there. But that was like one of the first books I read where I would have like an emotional reaction to, and I would be like, why am I so upset? I know this isn't real. Like, but I'm so invested. And I think that sparked this fascination with it, that you could build a completely made up world. And I always have had an overactive imagination. Some of my earliest memories as a kid was like pretending I was in Star Wars in the backyard. Now I'm like looking back, like, man, I hope the neighbors weren't looking out the window, because I don't even know what I must have looked like to them. But like, I always loved that. And so LJ Smith was one of the first authors. And another one is Joanna Lindsay. But yes. And now some of those books, warning, they are definitely, like, if you read a lot of romance, there is a trope of, I think it's called dubious consent. Some of these are not even that. So it was a different time,
Yes.
but there was just something about like the way she wrote. Like, she just had like amazing grasp of language. I feel like, there was just something about the way she wrote. So I think had a lot influence on me. What was her a genre that I like, that I don't think people I don't you know what, I don't think I think people who probably know me, probably, or readers probably would not be surprised, but they may be surprised by whenever I need to like take a break, I will go to historical romance, because it's like, even though fantasy I think is, has some similarities with that, I don't write that genre. so I can completely shut down and not inevitably compare myself to when I'm writing or reading, and I can just enjoy it. So I do like to read, like, nowadays, like Kerrigan Bryan Byrne. I always say her last name wrong. Um, I feel like she has like the updated version of, like, where it's like you remember some of these, but it's
Yeah.
more updated. And so that's the genre I think some people might be surprised that, like.
Right. I love that. So you mentioned authors that inspired you to write. So have you always wanted, I don't know the word I'm looking for here. Have you always strived? Have you always wanted to just be an author? Or was there a profession that you considered before you became an author, like another area of interest for you?
So, as most kids, there was 100 different things I wanted to be. I remember wanting to be a veterinarian, and then when I learned I have to, like, put animals to sleep, I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. And so there was things, but I wrote my first book in the ninth grade during algebra class. I think it was called The Forbidden Ones or The Forgotten Ones. I had to take remedial math in college because of that. So I do not recommend. So obviously from a young age, I wanted to be a writer. But the thing is that I knew that being able to write full time, if that's what I wanted, and to make a living was a one in a million thing. Like, it's like, I don't think writers give themselves enough credit. Like, when they think, oh, well, I'm not successful because I didn't hit a bestsellers list. I'm not successful because XYZ. And it's, first off, so hard to finish a book. And then it's so hard to keep doing that. It's so hard to get a readership and, to have any level of success. And I think success is different for everybody. But it is like as hard as, making a modeling career, a singing career, and like a fruitive or lucrative career. So I wasn't willing to, like, when I was going into college, I was like, I need a backup plan. And that's something that I've told younger readers, like, have a backup plan. Like, because it is hard. Like, it's hard to break into, whether you go the traditional route or the indie route, it's still going to be hard. So I went to school for psychology and sociology with a criminal justice track. I wanted to be a profiler, and who were, so not like the bad profilers, because I feel like now, like, people don't know what that word actually means in that sense. But I wanted to work in the behavioral science. That was my job, my not my job, my goal, and that's within the FBI. So they do, profiling for. This is so dark. Every time I have to talk about this, people always like, "What the fuck?" Is so, they do a lot of studying of serial killers, mass murderers, and, impulse killers, things like that. Their job is to, kind of get a case study on them, and then take that information to identify, and hopefully the end goal is to prevent, like, mass shootings, serial killers, to be able to know better when this is going to happen, or to recognize when this is happening, especially with serial killers, a lot faster. And because there was a part of me that's always been fascinated, as much as with Greek mythology, with, what is going on up here, that in the brain, that allows somebody to do this, and so that was something that, always was a fascination to me. So that is what I originally went to school for. And then I was like, oh my gosh, I was like 3 years in. And so where I live at, we're very close. I live in West Virginia, but believe it or not, we're really close to Washington, D.C. Like, I don't think people realize how, I feel like when you hear, I don't know where you guys are, West Virginia, they think, oh, out in the boonies. And it's like, well, yeah, we are in the Appalachian, or the Appalachia. Before I get yelled at, but we are in that, but we are in the part of West Virginia that does not claim the rest of West Virginia. So we're like an hour or so from DC. And so a lot of our adjunct professors, like, we're doing these jobs. Like, we would have them come in. And I don't know what it was about me during this period of time that this professor knew, because he knew. I remember pulled me aside and he asked me, I can't even believe I'm admitting this. He asked me, so how many drugs have you done? And I'm like, what? Excuse me, sir. And he's like, no, how much? Because he knew what I wanted. And I was like, well, I mean, a couple times. And at that time with the FBI, you would have to be a special agent to work in their profiling department. And to do that, you could only, and I'm sure this has changed, you could only have smoked pot 3 times. I don't know why 3 is a magical number. And you could never have done acid. And you also probably could have never done anything harder than that. And I had obviously smoked pot way more than 3 times at that point. And I had done acid once. It was nothing like I expected. So I'm also like, that's just bullshit. That like it wasn't even like that cool. That, I just talked to myself for like 5 hours, I feel like. But it would have disqualified me for becoming a special agent. Because and the thing is you can't lie. They will find out. Because when you go into a special agent, they do extensive background checks. And so I was like, oh man. And at that point, I didn't realize I had any vision problems. So I probably would have had a hard time qualifying. So then I went into psychology for a while. And so I was like, well, I already have all these credits. So I worked in I worked at a state run facility that had like branches that were more, because we have the state run institutes or the state institute, then they have like these like sub branches that are like smaller where they'll have like inpatient and outpatient treatment. So I worked for that. And I don't know if you guys have any experience, but you know, working for at that field for state run institutions is eye opening. I mean, it's very, if you've never seen it, whatever I could tell you, you probably would not believe. And it's just, I realized, and I worked with, because I had all the experience and I had taken all the classes, that was abnormal psychology. I, while I was deciding whether or not I wanted to get a doctorate, I worked in, as a technician for them. And so I dealt with like what they would call severe mental illness. So I would have like schizophrenics, or schizophrenia, personality disorders, things like that. So that's what I did for a while. And then I just realized it was hard. Like, I don't know. I mean, all the round of applause, the people who do that, because it is, it's like, it's very hard. It's hard to do that kind of work. But that's when I kind of realized I wasn't cut out for this. Like,
Right.
And so that's kind of what I went to school for, but it wasn't until the late 2000s that I decided to get back to writing. And because I do feel like, again, in college, you tend to read less sometimes, you tend to do that stuff less because you have all this other stuff going on. But yeah, I did originally want to work with serial killers, which is always awkward to tell people.
But I feel like that's such a great place to come from when you're thinking about writing, though, in terms of you have studied and also worked with such a vast, diverse group of people, from like patients to patients' families, that you have so much to draw from when you're writing characters, or like, how could somebody possibly feel in a situation I would never even dream to encounter.
Yeah, I think it helps you kind of flesh out characters more, because in psychology, you understand that everybody has a motivation, whether it's known to them or not, and they have an agenda, and it may not be known to them. And every action that you do, everything you say, there's something guiding that. And so I think, and it's not always bad. It's just that there's always a motivation. And that helps you, I think, build characters, because it makes you stop and think, wait a minute, there's a motivation for this. Especially when you're crafting villains, they're not bad just to be bad, unless you are dealing with like, like a, like a psychopath or something. Like, then you would have, but even then, there's always something else underneath of it. So I think it does like help you catch that you have to have motivation, you have to have a why behind the actions. Because sometimes I think we all have read books that we loved, right? But then when you kind of think about it, you're kind of like, why did they do that? Like, and I'm the type of person to always ask why. Like, I want to know, like, well, why did this happen? How did this happen?
I feel
Definitely.
like there's so many dark, like horror elements in these series that I'm waiting for the psychological thriller. I'm waiting for you to write one, especially with your background now. I'm like, okay.
I did write one, kind of. I wrote Don't Look Back. It's one of my first books I wrote. Because
Okay.
that's how long ago it is. So a lot of people don't even know it's there, because it was so long ago. But it's kind of has a little bit of that. But yeah, psychological thrillers are hard. I think it's suspense because you really do have to plot those books out completely.
Mhm.
Can't wing it. It's like
Yeah.
it all has to make sense. And
Well, some people do,
yeah.
I feel like.
Yeah,
Some
you can
of the
tell.
books do. Yeah. Not gonna name names. Just
You can be like, oh, well, this person's the bad guy, but they just were introduced in chapter 31.
yeah.
Like what the hell? Or like you have, and again, this is no knock against whatsoever, but like a lot of them will have unreliable narrators, and you don't realize until you're at the end it's an unreliable narrator. And here's the thing though, often they are done so well that when you get to the end, you realize that there were warning signs that whole time that you just weren't catching. And but those are the ones I'm always like, damn it. It's like it was you. You're the liar. And yeah, so those are good ones.
Well, since we both know, and I hope a lot of our listeners know, that you are one of the queens of romantasy. You have a huge hold on romantasy. We all know that you're really good with enemies to lovers. Do you have a favorite trope that you like to write? Is enemies to lovers one of your favorites? Or is there a favorite trope you haven't gotten to touch on yet? And if so, why?
So like, yeah, I don't think I could call I feel like if I was the queen, like it's, we share a title. There's multiple ones, I feel like, who um, definitely have that. I was joking around earlier. I was like, I will be a princess. Like, can I do that? You don't have the responsibility of
Yes.
the ones above you. It's their asses, not mine. Um, so yes, enemies to lovers is like one of my favorite tropes. Like I just love that. Like, and I'm not, and this is again, no knock. I'm not talking about like workplace enemies, right? No, I want like this is life or death. It's like, because you have a lot of that tension in that. You have a lot of the push and pull. You have the banter, and you can really get fun banter in that. So that's like one of my favorites. Another one that I have done, I think, once, and I've always had a weak spot for us. And I feel like any of us who had older brothers or older siblings, they always had one friend that you just thought was the hottest person on the face of this earth that you always inevitably made a complete ass out of yourself of. Or your sibling did not help with that, like would always like embarrass you. And so like I always have a weak spot for what is it, the brother's boy, the brother's friend's romance, or the sister, like yeah, it's like that has that type of thing, brothers or the sister's friend. And that is a trope I do have like a weak spot for, because I feel like again, if you have siblings, you can probably relate to that, because there's always like that one friend that you would like, oh my god, they're in the house, gotta run. And so that's when I have a soft spot. But I cannot read or write just romance. There has to be something else happening.
Right.
Because I just, I feel like that, because when you in the real world, you just don't fall in love and that's it. Everything ceases to exist. There's other things going on. So I like to have other plots, like a subplot going on with it. But in fantasy, I feel like you do get an equal amount of the plot and the romance. And I keep hitting my microphone. I'm sorry.
So you have published both independently and traditionally. What would some advice be for first-time authors that are wanting to get their work out into the world in navigating that kind of decision?
Yeah, it is a decision that I feel like has become easier and also harder at the same time, because when I got started, self-publishing was still very heavily frowned upon. So was small presses. They were seen as, how people would say, a step away from that, and they would never say it in a nice way. A lot has changed, which means it has opened up a lot of doors, but still there's a lot of decisions still to be made. So what I would give advice to people is, you have to do one thing I see that doesn't happen is doing research into the industry. A lot of authors come into the industry and are kind of wide-eyed and bushy-tailed, like where it's like, they don't really know how things happen, which means they don't know how to catch like certain warning signs that this may not be legit, or this may be a bad contract to get into. Or they may come into it and go straight to self-publishing and feel like well, why would I need an agent? Why would I need a foreign rights agent? And, so I feel like the best thing to do is to do research, is to learn the industry, because you're going to probably learn that there are books that are better suited for traditional, and there are books that are genres better suited for self-publishing. And then there are genres that work either way. And then you also learn that, hopefully you learn that both ways have a place in the industry. And if one would stop, so would the other. And that, because they are very symbiotic, and you cannot really have one without the other. And so I think research it, because I think we spend so much time on our craft that we really don't understand how things work. And you see that sometimes a lot on people who are giving advice, where, some of us who've been doing this for a long time, that we're like, oh my God, no, no, no. And we're like, please stop talking. That's not how it is. And again, a lot of it comes from a good place, but it could, if someone's listening to it, it's not going to work for them. But yeah, I would say research the actual industry, and also don't give up. I mean, if you want to go traditional, then go traditional, and there's no wrong way. Just remember that sometimes it takes more than one book. I had over 150 rejections before I got my first agent. And yes, I have every single one of those rejections still in my email. I cannot bring myself to delete them. I will never delete them. And my agent rejected me once before she made an offer, and on a different book. And, it can take that much. It can take that many times if you are looking for an agent, if you're going that route. And just because you're self-published doesn't mean then you hit publish and then you have all these readers just wait in the rings. You have to know how to market yourself, or because
Right.
you're not going to have, so you're not going to have that. So you really, I feel like you need to educate yourself on it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Sounds,
Nevertheless, she persisted.
yeah.
Yes.
Good for you. Yeah.
Yeah,
It
it was a
sounds
lot.
daunting.
Yeah.
And now getting into something very, very exciting. Not everybody gets their work optioned for a movie or a television adaptation, but you've been fortunate enough to have your Wicked series adapted by Passionflix, and now you're working with Amazon Studios on a From Blood and Ash series. That has to be so exciting and terrifying mutually. How difficult is it to let go of your babies and let other people take the creative reins? Or do you stay pretty in control of the changes for the screen?
So I've had, like, before Passionflix, I've had other stuff optioned before. I think the Lux series was optioned for quite some time. So I don't get really excited until someone calls me and says it's in production, because I understand that anything can happen between now and then. And like only 1% of books get an option, and then 1% of that 1% actually make it to production, and then 1% of that 1% make it onto a TV or movie theater, because a lot of stuff get made as a pilot and never never see the light of day. And so, like, I get a little bit excited, and then I kind of like, I just, you almost can't think about it, because you're like, I just don't know what's going to happen. But with Passionflix, it is an indie studio, or, company. So they do an amazing job. The difference is, when you're looking at somebody like Amazon Studios, it's a massive machine that's going to put that stuff everywhere. And that is exciting and terrifying. I make a joke, and I'm not really joking. I always said, like, oh, if that happens, I'm going to catapult myself off the internet, because you just there's no safe place at that point, because, like, everybody is going to have an opinion, and it's going to be ultimately sometimes on things you have no control over. And so, like, I believe, yes, I am an executive producer now. This isn't the same for everybody, but a lot of times an executive producer is a title, and that is it. It's a way that an agent gets more money for you, because you get another credit.
Right.
It also helps if you become really successful. You can create, like, your own companies regarding it, and you then have that executive producing cred. That doesn't mean that they're not going to listen to you, but at the end of the day, you sold your rights to your material to these people, so they ultimately have final say. I don't care what credit you have. You sold your rights. And you're an executive producer. There is like a metric ton of people higher than you that can do that. So I believe in my mind that you have like one or two things, right? That is going to be a hill that you will die on, and, that you're going to stand up for and you're going to fight for. But for me, you have to let go of some of the control, because ultimately, unless you're going to write that screenplay, you understand, at least for me, that I I have how many pages of introspection, right? Where really important things happen in that book that are not vocalized, that are not shown in an action scene or something. A screenwriter now has to take that scene and somehow transfer it, transform it to something someone can watch, right? You can't just have a person sitting there like at the window, like, Deep Thoughts by Jen. You can't have that. So that's where you start seeing changes happen, right? Where, and I bet you, if anybody looked at a book and looked at a recent adaptation and start looking, I bet you that's where you started to see changes, because they have to take that and somehow communicate. And when they do that, that sometimes creates more changes down the road. I am not somebody who is holding on to that with a death grip, because the books are the books and the TV show is the TV show. They come from the same place, but they're going to be differences. So I don't think I have a hard time letting go of it. I think I have a way less than probably some people do. Definitely more than the readers do of it. However, there are things that I would fight for, and there's certain things like how Poppy is represented is something that I've already been like, don't forget. It's like, and I understand that's going to be hard, because unfortunately the societal standards of people who make it into acting. However, you can find people. It's like, so I mean,
Yeah.
so it's something like that they know. And the thing is, though, it's like you have to kind of vet. Um, you have to make sure the people you're talking to get that. And I mean, before Amazon Studios had acquired it, a producer had it, and it's a really well-known producer, who I really like talking to, and he would have been great, but he ended up getting offered something else that he had to take, and it would not have allowed him to do this. Which, once I learned what it was, I was like, oh, I understand. I would have given up on this too, and took that. But then Amazon Studios had called, and they all did a Zoom with me, and it was all the heads of their studio departments, and they have all these different departments, and there was one guy on it, and then the rest were women, and he's the head, and so he did an introduction, and then he kind of sat back and he let the women talk, and that immediately was kind of like, I noticed that, and like, and he got it, like, and also they had told me that Amazon realized that they didn't have a lot of property that was really targeting women, that a lot of it was really targeting a male audience, and they wanted something that kind of did both, but picked up the outlander crowd, and but also could keep guys who really wanted to see action or adventure. And I think fantasy does fill that, that thing. So listen to them talk. I was really happy with what I was hearing, because they also knew that they could not cut back on the spice, because it's like you can't do that, because I was like, well, I know you guys have the boys, and I know there's some stuff that happens on that show, but that's different, right? Because again, it's like you can show all kinds of weird stuff, but the moment romance is involved, it's like all suddenly everyone's like clutching their pearls. And so, I was assured about that. And, again, I was really happy with them and the production company. And so I'm confident, that if it does make it to that point, they're going to do a damn good job. But it's nerve wracking, because you just, you never know really until, and the thing is with Hollywood, I don't know if you've talked to anybody else about this, but it's a lot of hurry up and wait, hurry up and wait.
Yeah.
Like, you will go long gaps of not hearing anything. And then you'll just get a phone call. Oh, we got a showrunner. We have a producer. We have this. And you're just kind of like, oh shit, I forgot we was even doing this at this point. Like, it's a lot of that. And, and that makes it a little bit exciting, because it's like, that could come. So, and also, yes, we do have a showrunner, and she's amazing. And, she worked on The Boys. She's worked on a lot of stuff, but she's also worked on The Boys, which I was also very excited about because, you know,
Yeah.
I love me some Jensen Ackles.
Who
And
doesn't?
I was like, I am now 2 degrees within him. And I'm like, I could never be anywhere near that person. Not because I would do anything creepy. It's because I think I would be like, I would just shut down like completely, right? I would be because I don't know like again how old you guys are, but like I felt like I was growing up watching Supernatural for like
Mm.
13 years, I think it was, like maybe longer. And it would just be like one of those people you meet that you would just be like, I can't speak. I can't talk. Yeah, so it was my way to get, I was like, yes, I am like one step closer to Jensen Ackles, which I do realize sounds creepy to say that out loud.
I
Your
think if
secret's
any
safe with us.
if anybody knows about Jensen Ackles, I think that they would agree with you. I don't
He
think you have
is,
to worry about the creep factor.
you know, and he is like him and all of them, especially from Supernatural. They're like such like I like watching them. Like they with their interact with their fans, like they're such good with that. And I don't think you see that a lot. Like I feel like they are a rarity. Like when you see them doing fan conventions, and I tried to get to one of them in that was in DC, and I was like, look, I'm gonna spend that stupid money. I'm gonna if I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna shoot for like the front of the thing, which is the prices on those tickets. I couldn't even get the nosebleed section. In seconds, that whole damn thing was sold out. I was like, are you kidding me? But then you see pictures and how like they take time with every single person. And I just think that you don't see that a lot, I feel like, with
No.
like actors and stuff. And it's, you know, I think they're great, the whole cast.
Gosh, you got to get your showrunner friend to, get a
Well,
little meet cute.
so when I did, when I was meeting with the production company, I was like, you know, who I think would make a good Victor. I was like, you know, the age it might be a little off, but you know what? We just saw him in a beard and some shaggy hair. He could pull it off.
Yeah.
But then again, after I said that, I was like, oh my God, that happened. Again, never allowed. I just could never be on this. I would just be sitting there like, I've watched you for 13 years. You know what I mean? Like you would just say things that you would just be mortified over later. Like you would just walk by and just be like, why did anybody let me talk? If you've read a lot of my books, you'll notice I work a supernatural reference almost into every single book. Like, and some of them are obvious. But writing fantasy made it difficult. But I did make it into From Blood and Ash. I just spelled the name different. And you know, Castile.
Yes.
It's like, and so that was my one shot was the name. And I spelled it different, which does change the pronunciation a little bit. But that was like, how am I going to get my natural references? But I do a lot. Some of the readers who've read a lot of them, they always try to pick out like the little references to it.
Oh my God. Well, speaking of other series and other stories, I'm just wondering, do you have any plans for any spin-off series potentially focusing on Nyktos, Reaver,
Mhm.
Kieran, other Draken?
I have
Especially
had,
Kieran. Oh,
yeah,
yes.
yeah. Kieran, I feel like like, somebody had asked me earlier, like what was like some of my favorite characters, and I said it's usually the side characters, like outside your main ones, because you
Yeah.
can have a little bit more fun with them. And especially Kieran, because I feel like he's the perpetual babysitter. Like I just picture him like every time like he needs a raise, he needs something
Yes.
because he's constantly like the voice of reason in a situation. And like I just imagine him like having a hold of like Cass by the scruff and popping because it's like, no, please y'all simmer down, like chill out for 5 seconds. Um, I there are tentative things I have in my mind like that I would like to do. You know, I just have to
Okay.
get there. And the thing is, it's like because I really don't count Flesh on Fire as a spinoff because it does, you know, if you've read the series, you do realize they're closely related. They will at some point, you know, and I don't consider this a spoiler, but it's like they would become concurrent in a way. And
Mhm.
like, you know, and so I, I don't really consider that spinoff. But so there's a couple other characters that I do have ideas for. But I feel like when you do a true spinoff, it's like you have to take enough time that you can go back into that world and make it new, which can be
Mhm.
hard to do a little bit because you want it to remind people of the existing series, but you also want it that it's not rehashing, right? The same stuff over again. And I feel like that is hard. So sometimes when I've done that, there has been like a little bit of years between them because it takes me that long to step away from it, to go
Mhm.
back into it and try to say, oh, I can now do this.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
think that makes
definitely.
sense. Yeah.
So obviously, we love this genre. We've been talking to you about it for almost an hour now. We are so excited that romantasy is finally getting the attention it deserves. A lot of people look down on romance, but they put fantasy on a pedestal of some sort of being kind of like a higher form of fictional literature. With romantasy, we have a marriage of the two wildly popular genres from two wildly different readerships, basically. What do you think that means for the future of publishing?
Well, I mean, I think, I have a I have a lot of opinions on why fantasy has always been seen as like, a higher pedigree, but romance has always struggled to get the
Mhm.
respect. And it's never made sense to me because romance has always been, I mean, not always, but for the longest time, the highest grossing genre that there is. It keeps the lights on, it keeps the bills paid, and yet it gets crapped on, even by people at the publishing company. Like the
Mhm.
things that as a romance author you sometimes have done to your scene that you would just be sitting there like, are you effing kidding me? Like, but it's and I think a lot of it comes down to it's a genre typically dominated by women, typically written for women. Now that's not always the case. There are definitely male readers who enjoy it. There's definitely male authors, but overwhelmingly that is what you see. And like with anything that is kindly, generally woman centric, it is crapped on. It is thought as less than. It people poke fun of it. And so I feel like, it has been getting a lot better. Um, Especially if things like book talk really taken off with the romance, I think has helped a lot. Um, but the reason that I think romance and fantasy have done so much is because it's taking the best of two worlds and putting them together. And I think for so long you did not see that in fantasy. That's not to say that there weren't fantasy books out there previously where the woman wasn't automatically going to be killed. Sex was a weapon, never anything to remotely be something that you would want to read. I don't mean that in a bad way, but like, you know what I'm saying? So that's something you would want to
Mhm.
experience. And, and it's like any romance ended tragically. Like, and I feel like that is what you saw for the longest time. Not always, but for the longest time in fantasy, especially in this type of fantasy. And if it had romance in it, it was never called fantasy. It's like a lot of people think fantasy romance is new. It's not. It was
Mhm.
just called paranormal romance. That's all it was called. And it's been around for a very long time. And but it did not, it's like you couldn't dirty the name of fantasy, right? And put it where it belonged. And now we're starting to see that change. And I think it has a great ripple effect because it shows you that there is a demand there. People want this. People want, because I know I love fantasy. I love that world, right? Like of just the action, the adventure, the mystery of fantasy. Because a lot of times they have mysteries to it. But I never felt like, well, shit, if I exist in this world, we know what's happening. Like you're not going to make it out. Or if you do, you're going to fall into the trap of, well, you're bad. Like you're the mad whatever. And that's just something you see very often.
Mhm.
And so you didn't feel really welcomed in that, I feel like. And but you're now seeing that change. And I do think I feel like it's already having an impact on the publishing industry, but I feel like it's having it in like the strangest, most unexpected ways because like I'm trying to think like how do I say this? If you look at Blood and Ash, you look at what is it, Gilded? You look at oh gosh, what's the one?
Oh,
Adeline Forrest writes, I think it's last, there are two of them. They write, I think it's What Lies Beyond the Veil.
oh, yes.
Yeah. Um,
Yes.
Fourth Wing.
Mhm.
None of them are traditional publishing. None
Mm.
of us are. We're either small press or independent press, or indie publishing. And I think that doesn't mean that traditional books, like obviously you have Sarah's books, you have them, you have Hurricane Wars, which just came out, which is amazing. You have that, right? But you see some of these like ones that went viral on TikTok or like whatever, they were not often traditionally published. And that is surprising, right? Because typically traditional publishers do have a larger marketing, they have larger like whatever reach. Um, but I think with Book Talk has removed that gatekeeping a little bit, like where it's like, because it's all word of mouth. It's, I mean, now, yes, you can probably, buy advertisements or influencers to do certain things, but for the most part, it's going to happen if it happens, but you can't force it. And I think it's just interesting that you're seeing its impact on publishing, but I just feel like it's very strange because, look, like Rebecca's book was just optioned by Amazon Studios. So it's like you have Amazon Studios now who's optioned two small, because Entangled is Red Tower, two small press series. Like you went back a couple of years, you would have never seen that. Like, so it's very interesting to me. And I don't know like what that means as a whole. It makes me wonder if, you know, like I don't know if Rebecca had taken that out in submission or anything. And I do know that I have once, mentioned Blood and Ash to like one of the editors at a traditional publisher I worked out. This is when I was kind of fleshing it out. And the moment I said vampires, they pieced right out of that conversation. Yeah, they were just like, they're still living 10 million years later, like there's after Twilight. And it's like, okay, first off, we have passed that point. Like,
Yeah.
it's like we don't have to keep comparing everything to Twilight. Um, but it's like it's odd. I don't even, maybe you guys have an idea, but it's something I've noticed that like you're seeing ones that they're not necessarily coming from the big publishers. They're coming from the independent publishers and they're coming from self-publishing. And there's more that I just can't think off the top of my head, especially in the indie world. I feel like there's a lot.
I think part of it, I'm on Book Talk all the time, which is when I'm not reading, I'm basically on Book Talk, which sounds kind of sad when I say it out loud. But
No.
but I think part of the thing is when you have big marketing companies doing marketing, you don't know what's true.
Yeah.
But when you scroll through your phone and you see somebody randomly loving or hating a book, you can feel pretty confidently that they're speaking their truth about their experience. And you can find people on Book Talk. If you have the same opinions about a lot of books, you're going to trust what they say. So if they say, I really love this, this is from a small publisher, like, I don't care. I'm going to go get that book. Because I have somebody that has the exact same reading taste as me who is saying, this was a 5 out of 5.
Yeah. And I think you're 100% right. I think that it's so much not fantasy romance because again, fantasy romance has been there. It's just been labeled something else. I will not even go on a limb. I think it's Book Talk because but see, this is not the first time that readers shape the industry. It doesn't happen often because publishers typically shape what's selling, right? They're the ones who will switch those trends a lot. And they will just decide no one's reading this anymore when people are still reading something. Back in the 2011, 2012, it was book bloggers. And they were the ones who were promoting the books on Tumblr, on Blogger, on then Instagram, on Bookstagram. And it's like you saw it happen then too, where they were the ones who really were the first ones to give like small press authors and indie authors an equal chance. Like they didn't care. Like some of these people don't even know who the publisher is. Like they don't care. They don't look at that. But when, I think if we didn't have bloggers who paved the way for Instagrammers, who paved the way for TikTok, we probably would not have so many of these books today that have taken off without the reader actually being the one who's controlling that market. And I think you're right. You can tell when something is genuine and when even if they don't disclose it's paid, you can kind of tell, right? Because sometimes it's all in the way how they talk about it. Or like when you see reviews where you're like, you didn't read that damn book. Yeah. Like your review didn't tell me anything. Like you just I could have taken this review and pasted it anywhere in any book and thing. And I mean, and that's another thing too with reviews. It's like, I think people often like they always like want to focus on like the negative side of something. And I always tell like new writers, it's like, look, yes, negative reviews hurt our little souls and they can sometimes suck, especially if they have a point. Like they're the ones that suck the most. It's because you're like, shit, they got me on that one. And but they rarely actually deter from sales because, and there's been extensive research on that. And I know there are some people probably who don't want to hear that, but it's true. It's because what is one person's yuck is another person's yuck.
Yeah.
And, there has been, I'm sure, books that you've seen people like not like certain things or not like a trope, but you're like, I kind of like that trope though. I like that type of book. Or my favorite is when you see a review where they're like, there's too much sex in this. And then you're like, add to my TBR.
Yeah.
And then 9 times out of 10, there's like one sex scene, and you're like, really? Like,
Oh my
but
gosh.
but no, it's like, but again, it's the community of readers who I think are shaping it more. And again, it's great to see that because I think it evens the playing field.
Yeah. I work
That's
at a
amazing.
big box bookstore. Like I work at an Indigo because we're in Canada. We're in New Brunswick, where we're coming from to you.
Mhm.
But yeah, I have people come in all the time and they're looking for books they found on TikTok that we don't carry because the older crowd who fund the store, who's on the board or whatever, they're great, but they're like, well, we can't put that on the shelf because of the cover or the title, or maybe they think it's a little too spicy or whatever. And I'm like, well, that's what people are reading, and it's not here. So they're going to order it online,
And
you know?
I with Indigo, I'm trying to think. Because so with mine, so Blue Box is they're a small press, but we have a large press distribution at Simon and Schuster who distributes books. And so that insides itself did open up, I think, more so for Indigo. Like I feel like I was in Indigo before then, but I think since they took over, we get the Indigo special editions more.
Yes.
Yeah,
Right
which
here.
we love. Yeah, and yes, I love that cover. I love that and the Fall of Ruin and Wrath cover. I'm like, damn,
Yes.
I like that color
Up there on my
Yeah,
shelf.
I'm like that because it's a color that you just wouldn't think. Like I don't know, like
Yeah.
when I heard it, I was like, oh, that's the look. But then I saw it, I was like, oh wow. And we all love special editions. So I mean but also on more so that Barnes and Noble, if you were a small press author, it took an act of baby Jesus to get you into Barnes and Noble at one time. But then Waterstones bought out Barnes and Noble and then had separated it more where instead of like the big people at the top making all the buying decisions, they started leaving it up to their regional people and their store managers. So what did you suddenly start seeing? You would walk into the stores and you would see book top, spicy top. And I remember some of these pictures where it was almost everybody on that table was indie. And it was shocking because especially Barnes and Noble, you never saw but it was a change in management and it helped them. They sold more.
Yeah.
And and even small presses had a hell of a time getting in because they couldn't they couldn't go up against the larger guys for shelf space because we all know this. That shelf space, and whether it's Indigo, an indie store, or Barnes and Noble is limited.
Yeah.
But Book Talk had a huge hand, like because if there's a demand, you need to supply it if you want to stay in business. And so, you're seeing more and more.
So something that really stuck out to both Kelly and I when we started reading From Blood and Ash is that the main character, Poppy, is not a traditional looking main character for a romance. We talked about this a little bit when we were talking about your Amazon optioning. She has a large scar on her face, and she's also not described as being skinny or skin and bones and has substance to her physical body. Can you speak more on that active decision and what it means to you to have more body representation in the romance genre, especially for women?
Yeah. And oh boy, does that ever become a hot button topic? Is that? And it's kind of sad because I wish we lived in a world where we could openly discuss this like on a Facebook thing or whatever and TikTok. and not ultimately it devolve into a body shaming. And it's either going to evolve into people who think if you're not skinny, you can't, like, I don't know, ride a fucking horse. Like, or if you are thin, then you're not a real woman. And that again is problematic on so many different levels. And I feel unfortunately a lot of those conversations almost always devolve into that. And I wish it didn't, because these are things I wish we could talk about like more. But yeah, it was an active decision. Most of my characters in my books are rarely described as being thin. Now, we also have to take in mind everybody's version of what is thin, what is skinny, what is plus size, what is fat is different. I have seen some wild versions of what people think plus size is, what they think skinny is. It's just everybody has their own thing. But I always try to, like, I would always default back to, like, in the past, like to average size. And again, that's not really saying much. Um, but I just thought when I was crafting Poppy's character, I knew that I was creating her in a society that put a high value on physical appearance. Like, that was, beauty was coveted. And again, I think some of that was inspired by Greek mythology. The different legends of the goddesses getting pissed because, there was somebody else, a mortal was more beautiful than them. And I kind of wanted to, I've kind of thought about, how that character would handle, like, knowing that they would have something that would societally be determined as something that isn't beautiful. But in reality, it doesn't detract from a person's beauty. And, in our world, it shouldn't. And in that world, it doesn't, where it adds, you know what I mean? Like, it adds, because that's the person's strength. That's their courage. That's a sign of what they survived that you see. So that's what helped shape that. Now, in terms of Poppy's body size, I remember thinking that when I was a younger kid and I'd be watching TV, and a teenager, I'd be watching TV, I'd pick up a book, I would look at a magazine. Every single representation of a woman was thin. And if they were like heavier, they were almost always the villain, or it was cast in a comedy, but they never were the romantic interest. They were never written, portrayed as the main character in a good way. And they were never, like, again, never the love interest. And I just kind of thinking that, how would I have felt as a teenager or somebody in my early 20s if we had, and this is nothing against Sarah Michelle Gellar, she's amazing, right? Nothing against that at all. But what if we had, like, a Buffy that was a little bit heavier, like, that represented a little bit more what, the average population, at least of the United States, looks like? And I thought, man, that might have, like, hopefully at some point made me not constantly be conscious of my weight, my appearance. And I feel like that's something that women have to constantly deal with in the back of their minds, right? Even if nobody's saying anything. It was something I realized too, not too long ago. It was like, I'm in my 40s and I cannot think of a time past, probably I was 13 or 14, where it wasn't always in the back of my head, because we've been presented with what is considered beautiful, what is considered healthy, what is, considered XYZ. And so I was like, I didn't have that. I honestly, I don't even think kids today have that, right? Like, I don't, like, I feel like you can't even watch a damn Bounty paper commercial and it not be some woman who's extremely thin, dressed in a way that I do not dress when I'm cleaning the fucking house. Like, what
Right?
are you, who it looks like that? Like, I look like I just rolled out of a Mack truck. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's just, but have you noticed something though? The husbands, quote unquote, the males always look almost 9 times out of 10 average, right? They're your dad bods, quote unquote.
Yeah.
They look more like, oh, I could see him at Appleback. Appleback. That's what I always call Applebee's and Appleback, because they're across the street from one another. But you could see them sitting at your local restaurant. But the women are always classically attractive. I mean, this is a paper towel commercial, and I don't know why. I mean, I know why I pay attention to that. Some of it's psychology, but some of it's like, you can't, at some point you get to the age that you can't help but notice that, like, you can't exist in any type of form other than this. And that's
Mhm.
one of the things why I started to be more obvious about the character I was writing. And even after writing From Blood and Ash, I realized I had to be more obvious because there would be people who's like, well, it wasn't described XYZ. And that's when I started to realize, and I realized this earlier, that we do two things, especially us whiteys. We do two things. We white cast everybody because that's where we default to. And then we skinny cast. I don't know what the word is for that because that's what we're exposed to. So you have to be more obvious, right? And I feel like as an author, you always think, oh, well, this is, maybe this seems weird that I'm repeatedly saying something over and over again, but you kind of have to because based on what we have been exposed to forever, it seems like we automatically, unintentionally default to characters to certain things. And it's because this is what we've seen. So I realized with From Blood and Ash, when there was so much conversation about whether or not Poppy was skinny or not. And I was over here thinking, like, well, I thought I made this pretty obvious. But then I'm like, it's not obvious enough. And so that's something as authors we do have to be a little bit more, I think, conscious of because there is that unintentional, and it is often, and this is just not, it's just not white people who do that. People of all races default to what they're accustomed to, and and it's hard because you have to unlearn like what you've been exposed to. Um, but it was important to me to show that because I just feel like I kind of, and again, not to be all melodramatic, but I kind of wonders like, what would I have thought of myself, you know, if I had exposure to that? Because I'm sure all of we do this. When you look back at pictures of yourself, like when you're in your like late teens and your 20s, and you're like, oh my God, what the hell is wrong with you? You would give up your left arm to have like to look like that, but you still didn't feel good enough. You still didn't feel like, well, I'm not fitting into, and again, I grew up, you know, the 90s, 2000s when it was heroin chick, I think is what they called it, the Kate Moss era, where it's like these people were so thin. And, and you would, no matter what you did to yourself, you were never going to achieve that. And so it was important to me because I just keep thinking, what if I had access to something like that? And also, I think some of it is because it's like, there are some people out there who just, I don't think know how the body works. So, I mean, like they have a hard time grasping at like, if you're not skinny, I'm sorry, you think someone who's not skinny can't pick up a sword, but you think someone who is can? Have you picked up a fucking sword? Like, you know what I mean? Like those things are heavy. Like you would, yeah, if you read my books, you notice that I will have them doing things with a short sword versus a broadsword. Those things are, I don't even know how they use those things in battle. I feel like by the time I would have gotten that thing picked up and I would have been dead. I would just been like, they could have just slowly walked up to me and just stabbed me, and I would have been like, well, there that went. But it takes a lot of strength. And so, I mean, it's just one of those things that I think it comes from a personal place of, I wish I had that, like growing up. And I don't know about you guys. I don't know what you read, how you felt, because I don't think you have to be, non-skinny to feel that way. I feel like even if you're naturally thin, or even if you work at being thin, you often feel like it's never enough. Like it's never going to be enough. I'm always going to be living, like thinking about your effing weight. And so there's just something about that I just get so frustrated with. And that's why if you notice, it's not a thing for the most part in the series. It's just not. It's because I would love a world like that where like race, your sexuality, your weight, none of that, it's not a thing. Like, it's, and so I wish it just didn't take place only in fantasies.
Right. Yeah. Well, you just briefly touched on sexuality there, so I will jump off of that and say, not only do you talk about body image in a way with your books, because Poppy is not thin, she is a bigger girl. You also talk about sexuality and sexual freedom a bit in your books, which I really love. I really connected with Poppy because not because of her badass fighting skills, though I wish. I so wish. But because of her inner transformation in regards to discovering that her sexuality or pleasure is not bad, which I think a lot of young people and a lot of women especially can relate to. So, it's so refreshing to read a character who's very strong physically, but she's still figuring things out for herself and evolving at the same time. But it's important to note that Poppy's not your only sexually liberated female protagonist, because you have Callista in Fall of Ruin and Wrath. She owns it.
Yeah.
And we have steamy moments with her and Thorn and her friend and sometimes lover Naomi, which that like never happens in romance books, I feel like, or at least in the fantasy romance I'm reading. It's like we have one couple and that's it. We don't have like these other hookups and steamy moments. So when I read that, I was like, this is super awesome. And it's just more honest and realistic, I feel, with the world today, but just people in general. Like, you're not only going to have one partner in your life for most people. So my question with all of that is, you're not afraid to do what you want and have people do who they want, I guess you could say. So why do you think it's taken I can't say the whole romance genre, but a lot of the traditionally published or like big romance books
Extreme.
so long to include a fuller sexual experience? Like, why do you think this is slowly appearing, or has it been slowly appearing for a bit now?
I think it has been slowly appearing, but you have to remember, I don't know so much about Canada, but America, there is still very much a Puritan value hold on how the country got started.
Mm-hmm.
And, when I was talking earlier today about like, one of my books being contested in, Florida, and the extremes that this group went to, all because of, the perceived sexual content. But keep in mind, they never had a problem with the violence in that book. And
Mm-hmm.
it's got some violence in it.
Oh yeah.
And that always. And again, this, it wasn't like they had From Blood and Ash in the school library. Even I would have been like, what? Like, okay. But that might be a problem. But like, that always got to me, right? That they never have a problem with violence, but consensual sex or emotions or feelings is suddenly like, oh my God, save the children. And it's like, what? It's like,
Yeah.
it's like, so, okay, seeing people get ripped limb from limb is eat better for you. All right. But like, I think it's a bit of that Puritan and the belief structure that kind of comes in. That again, it's nothing like appearance. That is like an unconscious bias that just gets drilled into you by everything you see, right? And then when you think of like a poly relationship, your mind immediately goes to like polygamous or something, and it's like, first off, it's not the same thing. But there are like, you could, there are going to be people who could argue that probably would have, depending on what we were talking about. But when you do have lifestyles of like people who are in a poly relationship, it almost becomes like a circus show that gets shown on like always TLC. I feel like, what a strange the learning channel
Right.
network now. I don't understand what we're learning. But like, it's, I feel like, first off, it's like, I want my books to represent the world that we live in, even though it's a fantasy. And through that, you're going to have different ethnicities, races, and sexualities. Now, of course, it's a fantasy, so you can't label them like we would. Um, but especially with the terms of sexuality, is that, I have different, I think, views sometimes on like what sex is and what love is. So there are people who always associate sex with love, and then there are people who don't. And I don't, neither are right or wrong. It's just people's different views. But I think, coming from a psychology background too, it's hard for me not to look at like love a different way, because I know there are people who believe that you can only love one person and you can't love someone else. But I have known people that had equal amounts of love for other people, like sometimes in a sexual way also, and sometimes in a platonic way. Like, you have friends, right, that you love possibly as equally as your significant other. So you have the capacity. And the thing that might change that, though, is a physical level of attraction. And so that's something that kind of plays in the back of my head a lot with it. But also, I feel like when you are dealing with people in my world who live for hundreds of years, they're going to be experimenting.
Right? At the very least.
Right? They're going to be like, hey, I've already done this enough. Let's try this out. And I feel like there is that. But also, I feel like there are probably, and again, oh gosh, I hope your listeners don't get upset. But coming from a psychology background, can't blame me for it. But like, there are probably more people out there who don't even realize that they may be pansexual or they may be bisexual, because a lot of these are similar to one another. There are differences, but they've never been allowed to explore that. And it could be because they believe they can't, or the family, the city, the town, like there's so many things that can stop that, right? And I feel like, I mean, it's not so much a feeling. Like, they've done studies where there's a lot, and that's why a lot of times you see people who are older starting to acknowledge that, you know what, yeah, like, you know, I do have either, because difference is a sexual attraction versus a romantic attraction, or both. And I do think more people do have that than they probably realize. And so, working that in there and having that again, where it is not something that is the basis of stratification in that world. It's not something anybody bats an eyelash. And I do think with the fall of Rune and Wrath, like it, I, I imagine it might be surprising to some people to have seen Naomi and Liz, together. Because I do think that even us, we have a tendency to write sometimes with the male gaze, like with the sense of, if it's a threesome, well, actually, this is wrong. I don't want to say that's not correct. I guess you could say female gaze, right? Where, because the male gaze is two women and a man, and the female gaze would have been two men and a woman. And, and it's, so I think that both of them are okay. Both of them can expose you to something new. Both of them can be hot. And so I think that that's the reason why I did that, because I feel like now you tend to see like more reverse harems. And then, like, because I think now that you have people with the best intentions, that they think having two women together, and that if they don't end up together, it's written in the male gaze. And it's like, that's not always the case. Like, there's different degrees of this. And, that it just, no, that's not how that always works. And that's one thing I kind of wanted to touch in the other one, which is like, they would have had that type of relationship. And again, it comes back to like the body positivity. It's like sexual positivity, because I still, like, again, we're living, we seem to be going backwards in some areas, and it's shocking, but not. But still, sometimes when you see how far that we're moving back in some places, where we're like, it's almost like watching a train wreck in slow motion, and you can see it, and you're just like, but nobody's doing anything to stop it. Like, or you feel like that people are, but you just feel like that. And even though this is a fictional world, I feel like just showing these different types of relationships, this is one little teeny tiny like chip away from that. And or maybe adding just a tiny bit to that break to be like, we need to stop. It's okay for you not to like something. It's okay for you not to be comfortable with something, but you do not get to determine what somebody else wants to read. And again, there are always going to be outliers where we hear about books coming out that we all do a double take and we're like, what? But it's, for the most part, we should not be enforcing our own personal choices or beliefs onto other people when it comes to something like this, because it is a bit of a slippery slope you start going down that leads to what we're having now, and in the school districts and things like that.
Well, we have to bring it up because you kind of brought up already with the mention of a threesome, two men and a woman. We have to bring up the joining in the War of Two Queens, because Nikki and I were living for the joining. We were ready. We were excited. There was a little controversy online. You know, it's going to happen a little
Yeah.
bit. But, you know, I'm not sure I've read a romance series where we go, like I said earlier, we're focusing on one couple and then we have another player enter the relationship in the way that Kieran does there. However, because we've read all these books, I don't think it came out of left field at all. I was so ready for it. I was so excited. Can you tell us a bit about what it was like seeing this complex relationship unfold as you were writing this series? Because it was not like left field, Kieran's here. It was, you
It
can
was in
look
the first
back,
book.
reread.
I don't mean to
Yes.
spoil things, but he's literally in the bathroom, the bathing chamber, excuse me,
Right?
while she's bathing, and she says, "Would Cass have a problem?" And he's like, "No, this would probably
Mhm.
interest him." And again, like I mean, and sure, that's not super obvious, right? But if it was even more obvious than that, then you're moving into Creeperville territory where it's like,
Yeah.
excuse me, sir, like that's just inappropriate. Even though, yeah, being in the bathroom, you know, blurs that line. Um, but so yeah, so I think that some people who did have a problem with it is they felt that they weren't sold a reverse harem, and I argue until I'm blue in my face, like that's not a reverse harem.
Yeah.
Jesus, can we stop changing the meaning of words? like, it's just like because it, words and terms change. They do. This is not that. There are industry standards that the actual industry itself operates by. So whatever you believe it is does not change. What the entirety of the industry is like erotica and romance. It's like when I see people calling Colleen Hoover's books erotic, I just want to pitch myself out the window. I'm like, that's not erotica. Like, there's a difference there. It's like there's literally a formula to erotica. There is a percentage of sex that's in a book and a percentage of plot that determines whether or not it's erotica. And guess what? I don't write erotica. Nothing wrong with it, but I don't write it.
Mhm.
Colleen surely
We
does
read
not
it.
write it. Yeah, and I've read it, love it. Some of my favorite books are like, whoa, like like where you're just like, oh my. But like it's there just has to be at some point some agreement on what these things mean. But yeah, so it wasn't a reverse harem situation, and there's nothing wrong with that. I do like those books too, or the why choose. I hear as a big thing.
Yes.
But yeah, it was hinted at from the beginning. Originally, I had thought that it would occur in the second book because I thought I'd be further along in the plot as I began writing it, but then I realized that no, because I also, if you look at the title, A Kingdom of Flesh and Fire, is because I thought they would be in Atlantia by then, completely like in Atlantia. But as I
Mhm.
was writing it and I was, coming up with new things, and I was like, well, that's not happening. But also, I wanted to make sure that Cass and Poppy were in a very secure, because, for anybody who's ever done something like this, whether it's one off, whether it's the beginning of a poly relationship, whether it's something else, the main couple that starts off, like they have to be very um, secure in their feelings for them. And because if you're not, that is going to likely end very, very badly with
Mhm.
jealousy, with stuff like that. And so I knew that before this was to happen, I wanted to make sure that Poppy and Cass were in a secure, like knowing how they feel for one another. They're no longer ignoring it or denying it. Because at that point, I felt that okay, they're stable, and again, always planned for it to happen. Plan for it to happen sooner. But the plot, I wanted, it just kind of went in a little bit different direction with certain things that caused the books to be longer. Um, and you know, it was something that I always knew I was going to do. And it was kind of important to me because, it was mainly because I was kind of like, yeah, this is something you really don't see in a quote unquote commercial or mainstream type of book. And there are people, real people, whose relationships are this. And
Mhm.
you know, one of our copied editors has been in a years long poly relationship. So it's like, because and that's another thing too, is like people like try to treat that like a monolith, like you can't. Like it's everybody's experiences are completely different. For example, you always hear people people, and usually it's women saying this, a throuple, but correct me if I'm wrong, but that mostly came out of male, male, male was a throuple, I think, originally. Like, that's how I always heard it years ago. They would refer to that as a throuple, but then, now you're seeing it more kind of moving into this language. But it was something that I knew I was always going to do. And there, other than there being like, oh, but why? But if you've read through the series, if you've read the most recent book that came out, there is a reason. And so, like, it's like, yes, even though I was like, I'm going to write this because I think, it works, it fits. For me, I thought, oh, this is, kind of sexy scene on top of it, but they all legitimately love one another. And they legitimately have this closeness and that has developed, alongside each other, right? And so it's multifaceted, but there is also another additional reason for that to have occurred. And I feel like, it's like one of those situations where I feel like the majority of readers saw it coming. Some maybe weren't going to be happy about it, and I knew that. You cannot make everybody happy. But I also knew, and it was kind of, I felt like a little bit of a no-win situation, because if I pulled back on it, people would have accused me of catering to readers. And then when I went forward with it, people accused me of catering to readers.
Yeah.
So I mean, it was like, well, no, I'm actually catering to myself here. But again, the vast majority were fine with it. But again, it's like with any situation, the people who are upset are always going to be the loudest. So it's always going to seem bigger than what it is. And I'll admit, I knew some people were going to be upset. But there were some people of that group who were upset that I did not expect for them to take it as far as they did. I mean, I have been in this business for a while now. At that point, I probably have written at least over 60 books. I have a pretty good like relationship, even with negative reviews. Like, that's not for me, that's for other readers. And I know my place, your place. It's cool. But there were some that I was shocked. I was like kind of taken aback, because I was like, first off, y'all, this isn't real. Like, this isn't real, but you're out there with your whole ass on social media, literally threatening my life and threatening to kill my alpacas and my dogs. Like, first off, I would like to see you try those alpacas.
Oh my God.
Oh, it was bad. It was bad. And but I can make a joke about it, because again, I like to see you try to walk up on those alpacas and they'll stomp your ass first off,
And spit
and then
on
they're
your
spit in your
grave.
face, and you will never get that smell out of your nose as long as you live. But no, there were people. There's a couple whose reviews literally had, and I think these were people who were younger. To be honest with you, I think these were people who were too young to be reading this, probably. And I don't believe that books have really an age limit. You know what you're ready for, and you know what you're not. And I think they just weren't ready for something like that. I don't know, but I got, from seeing what I saw, I just got the impression, because some of the word usage, and also when they would have people who were in poly relationships, and then they would call them like horny soccer moms. And I was like, okay, well, we now know your age. You just revealed yourself, because no adult says that. But like, yeah, there were, oh my gosh, yeah. That's the part that just took me back so much, because I was like, in this day and age, you can't dismiss stuff like that, right? Unfortunately, you can't. Like, there always is that teeny tiny chance that this person may not be emotionally or mentally in the right place. And when you're an author and you're doing events, like, you're doing things like that, like, it was a start, because never in my life have I experienced something like that. And it was a bit shocking, because it was like, are you kidding me? And I just recently, I did a like a live, I know I did something on YouTube with somebody, and I guess like somebody in the comments had said something like, do you feel bad for doing the joining? And I didn't get the chance, like, I didn't see it until afterwards, and I had wished somebody had said it to me, because I would have answered. which is no, I planned for it. But the better question is, the people who were threatening my life, do you think they feel bad now?
Yeah.
Because I think that's
God.
the better question to be asking people. That there is no excuse for that. There's absolutely no excuse for that. And it's still to this day, it shocks me a little bit because it's like, and it forced me to kind of have to take a step back in some ways because I was like, I don't, and I'm not trying to be dramatic, but it's like you don't feel safe. And I don't mean physically, but you don't feel safe in situations like that where it's like everything feels like it's a landmine, where it's like, am I going to get somebody who's just going to say the worst things that, yeah, you don't like the book, that's okay. Congrats. There's other people out there who are going to agree with you. But to take it to that level, like that's not okay. It's not a typical behavior. And then to put it on the internet, like you don't realize that you could get in trouble for that. Like, and
Yeah.
also it doesn't matter if you delete that shit. It's there. Someone can find it.
Yeah.
I mean,
And then
it's like,
you're gonna make a
yeah,
profile on them and
yeah.
give it to the FBI.
Right. Well, I mean, it's like there's a cache, right? That is the time machine that you can do. Like in certain jobs, they do that for employees. Like they do the time machine search. We've all seen it on the internet, right? When people would say stupid shit on the internet and then consequences ensue, like one after another. And but yeah, that was, I just never, like, I knew some people were going to be upset, but I did not expect a percentage of them to go that far. It just, that never crossed that people would do that. It's just because I was just like, this is a book. Like, and like nothing bad's happening. Like it's just, I don't, yeah. So it was a bit much, but again, most people were fine and they were good.
Yeah, it's scary how anonymous people can feel online. Like even if you have your picture on your profile or your profile says your freaking
Mhm.
name, people feel like
Right.
they are just this thing in the ether and they can
Yeah.
do whatever they want.
It's impulse, right? It's that impulse. Trust me, we've all have moments, right, where our impulse to emotionally react to something is not good. It's like,
Clearly
and
some worse
yeah,
than others.
yes, yes, because most of us would have been like, well, I'm not going to post that. I'm going to text that to my friend.
Yeah.
Like
Yes, in the group
maybe
chat.
leave the death threats out because it should never be escalating to that.
No.
But I mean, and I think though with the death threats, it was like what bothered me is they knew the animal's name. It's like they knew my dog's name. So these were people who paid attention enough that they knew, and that just made me like that. And again, like,
Yeah.
yeah, it just makes you now think like, okay, like let me make sure like we have different cameras set up. It's like because I've had readers shut my house before. Luckily, it's been good stuff. Like it's, I mean, hey, you should probably never do that.
Oh
I mean,
my
for Facebook
God.
saying that, but they've never been mad. But like, because in the state of West Virginia, if you own a business, your address is public records. Yes, it
Oh,
sucks. Yeah, and
That's
so like it, yeah, I don't know
crazy.
why any state, like the danger in that, just for anybody, right? Like if you meet the
yeah.
wrong person and then they stalk you, and you like, it's like I don't understand.
Like we
But
love you, but we won't be at your door.
yeah, right.
So don't worry about it.
That day I had two people who helped, like one Jen who runs the shop and Melissa were here, and I was inside the house working, and I could just tell by the way they walked into my office. I was like, something just happened. And they're like, a reader is here, and I'm like, what? And my immediate response, I actually got up to go outside because that was my immediate response. Like it was like, and they were like, you sit down, you're not going outside, and I was like, but it was again, it like, yeah, so that stuff happens, and you, so when you have this other thing happen, it makes you think more about that. That yeah, people can find you and they can just walk right up onto your property, and that just, again, something like that's likely to not happen, but there is always the one who proves that's not the case.
Right.
And so yeah, and so that's like kind of like, I feel like that's one of the darker sides of stuff, and you see that, I feel like, with a lot of anybody who has any level of publicness, that you see that a bit on it.
Right. So we have one more question for you before we get into a few of the questions that are specifically about A Fire in the Flesh. But I mentioned this in the intro, that you were diagnosed with retinitis pigmentosa a few years ago. Do you think your diagnosis has influenced the stories or characters you've created since?
I think it has. I wrote Storm and Fury. The character in that has the same eye disease that I have. Mainly because, I think for us or for other people, and even for me before this, it's like you don't realize there's different degrees of blindness. Like you think of the blind, you think of people who just have a little bit of vision problems, and then people who see fine. And not realizing like legally blind, there's so many degrees like that you may not know that the person is struggling to see something. Um, and for me, it was mostly like social interaction because when I do events or something, and a person may recognize me way far out, but I cannot see them. And they may think that I'm ignoring them and I'm being like a bitch, but in reality, I literally cannot see them until they get like close to me. And so it kind of, I feel like it like really affected like that social level thing. And obviously, there is a mental effect of, I've been very lucky. My vision loss is slow. Most people of my age are almost completely blind or blind. But my vision loss has slowly progressed. That could change at any second. Like these disorders, they, they don't really understand all of why they do what they do. And so there was a mental thing that messes in the back of your head. And I will say, when I was first diagnosed with it, it caused me to write a lot more because I felt like I was writing underneath like a ticking clock counting down because I kept thinking in my head, like, am I going to even want to write once this happens? Like, I'm going to have more important concerns in my mind. Like, how do I even pick out an outfit? Kind of things. Like, you think these things, right? Um, but over the course of the time, as I've gotten more and more used to it, and my vision has progressed, um, I've realized that your brain is an amazing thing that adapts for you without you ever even realizing that it's doing it. But it also helped me kind of explore like what's something that we may see as ourselves as a weakness, or people also may see as a weakness. And I'm using that word on purpose because you're not supposed to say that, but that is often what people think of themselves. That is the truth. And, and I wanted to work that in different ways, that things that people may perceive as being something that would hinder you, it's not always going to make you better, but it's something that you learn to live with, you learn to work with, you learn to adapt with. And even though like a disability or a mental health concern, um, it's not the sum of who you are. It's just a part of who you are. And the strength that does come from that doesn't come from, the mental health issue or the disability. It comes from you adapting to it. It comes from you being like, okay, this, no one's stopping this. This is going to happen. How do I continue doing this? And also giving yourself like grace to have those days where you're like, I don't want to deal with this. I don't want to think about it. And that has also just manifested in different ways where I kind of build a character where it's like you can have those moments where you're like, this sucks. Like, you know what I mean? Allowing yourself that. But also speaking about it in a way that is, I do think we spend a lot of time policing how we talk about things and we do it in a good way. We do it in a way from the best of intentions. But at times it makes people feel uncomfortable talking about something they're even dealing with because they're so worried about, am I talking about it right? That we're forgetting that this is actually how a person thinks. It's not up to you or even me to correct that. That is up to that person, an actual trained professional, not somebody on social media, to help them with that. And, and I feel like that's something that I wanted to kind of show in different ways. And having, RP had made it easier for me to talk about like, the struggles I've had with depression, anxiety, because it made it more like, it made me feel more comfortable because I feel like there was a time too where I never said anything because I'm like, I'm coming from it from the other side where, psychiatrists are very blunt how they label things because there's no emotion tied to that. This is how we know these things. And then seeing, I just remember on Twitter back in the day when it was Twitter, and back in the day where people talked about books there, and there was a whole book community there, right? And I just remember like, oh my gosh, like I forget what the situation was, but somebody had written a book, I think, about like depression or something, and somebody was just going at like another person because of like the language that was used, and the person who was doing this did not work in the field. I don't even know if they were even took a class in college for it or not. Um, but I'm watching this and I'm like, this is a shame. This is tragic because this person who's kind of gatekeeping this conversation for some reason or appointed themselves the person to speak on it is coming from a good place. But in reality, it's silencing now all these people who feel the same way that one person did. And because again, this is how our brains work, how we think about ourselves, right? And I was like, this isn't doing what we think it's doing. This is silencing people. It's making them uncomfortable to open up because now they're worrying about, well, I referred to myself in the wrong way. And it's like, yeah, it's a very complicated types of conversations that I think are very difficult to have on social media. Um, so I try to have them a little bit in books, like where you're kind of showing it how it really feels for a person. Because again, I say all that, and I say 9 times out of 10, the people who do this are coming from a good place. They truly are. But you have to be very careful when discussing things like mental illness, or mental health concerns, because you that's a very fragile thing to be broaching into. And you can go in it with the best intentions, and then you've made the situation worse. And I feel like that just again gave me more of a comfort, because even coming from the field of psychology, that even there's still stigma for me, right? Like there always is a stigma, even though you know better, and still you fall prey to that. And so it kind of made me have the courage a little bit to be more vocal about it and to show it in different ways.
Well, I think the way you handled Sierra's anxiety in the books, like throughout the whole series, was very well thought out and like with great care. And I loved seeing the different perspectives, like through Ash trying to help her and her at the well, we're about to get to spoilers, but there is a moment at the end of the book where she has a thought to herself, like, even after all of this, I'm still anxious and it's not fair, but it's the reality, you know?
Yeah, I don't want a magic fix because there is no magic fix. There's no magic
Yeah.
fix. And the same thing with Trinity. Her vision wasn't fixed because for me, it was somebody with this. If I read a book where someone's vision was repaired, I would kind of be a little bit, I don't think I'd be pissed is the right word, but I'll just be like, you do realize people who have this, they don't get that. Like, you know what I mean? There's no magic fix. I made a point that for people to know that this did not fix that. She still has it because that's the reality of it. Some people's anxiety and depression are caused by environmental factors, and that can go away once that's addressed, right? But then there's some people who have literally no inciting event. It could be a chemical issue, it could be a hormonal issue that cannot, for whatever reason, cannot be resolved without medication. But that's medication that you're going to always have to be on, and it's not always going to work. It's like having breakthrough pain. It's having breakthrough where it's just not working today,
Yeah.
And I just don't, I don't want that magic fix. Because I just feel like it's not real. And I don't know, it just makes me uncomfortable because it's like, I want people who have this to see that and you're still badass. You're still badass. It doesn't matter. You're still badass.
Okay, listeners, at this point in the episode, we're going to head into spoiler territory. So if you're still reading Jennifer's latest releases, there's no shame. Take your time, enjoy, but then come back to listen to the rest of this interview. So now that they're gone, it's just us. Something I love about your books in general is that the villains are ruthless, so much so that I'm genuinely terrified of Colas, like throughout this entire book. I'm like scared for what's to come because at the end of the book, he's in stasis, but I'm like, we know he's not going to stay there. He's going to come back. And no matter if it's Colas or the Duke in the first book from Blood and Ash, the Lords, like they're so vicious. And now that we know you have a background in psychology, I'm like, okay, here we go. With your background, are we going to see maybe something that will feel like more empathetic towards them or sympathetic, or like how much screen time is he getting after everything that's transpired? Because he's going to come back, but
Well, so when I wrote A Fire in the Flesh, I think what empathy that you're going to see for him, you saw it there. Where, I think through Sera, you saw, because she had referenced that, like glimpses. Like sometimes she would see glimpses of who he must have been at one time, like who he was that his brother was able to still hang on to. I feel like we all know somebody who's kind of just went down that wrong path in life, that you still like hold out this little bit of hope that they're going to find themselves, and then finally get to the point where it's like, nope, like this person's this is it. But
yeah.
there are moments in A Fire in the Flesh where, I feel like you may have had glimpses of it. Some people might not see that because the other parts of him are pretty traumatizing. Like he is a master manipulator. He's a master gaslighter. He is, he knows how to work people. And I knew I needed to show that because you heard about how, like, from the previous characters, you heard from them how bad he was, right? And you hadn't seen it. And once I had her there, I had to show this. I had to show how he could literally, and here's the thing, like, Sera is smart, she's clever, she is ruthless herself. And yet even she was manipulated into killing somebody. And the thing that was messed up about that scene was Colas was right.
Yeah.
When he said to her, you're judging other people based on what you think.
That was so stressful, Jennifer.
Yeah. It was stressful writing it because I want to make sure I was walking. Again, when you write characters like that, it's a fine line.
Yeah.
And, he is a narcissist. Like, I feel like a lot of people say, oh, everybody thinks they know a narcissist. But in reality, true narcissists, thank God, are not that. That does not mean that they don't have narcissistic tendencies. And that's bad enough. Like, if you've ever seen someone with narcissistic, Colas is a narcissist at this point. And narcissists will do one or two things. They will victimize themselves because they're never the bad person. Or they can never show what they view as a weakness, right? So they always overcompensate with usually a horrible action. And most villains never believe that they are the villain of their story. They are the hero. And so it was walking a balance with that, with him, and showing just moments where you could talk to, him and Sierra would be talking, and it's like, it's a kind of a normal conversation, right? It's like, but then he'd flip. He'd like, and again, if you've known somebody who is narcissistic, and there's other disorders that are left untreated, you will see that, where there is this severe switch in that personality. And it can be frightening for some, and I hate to say that word, but it can be scary when you see that happen, because it is literally like watching someone change into somebody else right in front of your eyes. And I do think that, some people who have experience with like domestic violence and things like that, they probably know that better than anybody else, where, you see that person just switch. It seems like they're switching personalities, but in reality, the good parts of them were more facade. That was the mask that they were wearing. With Colas, it's a little bit of both of that. Like, he wasn't always this way. He was somebody who was shaped by what he'd experienced, but also how he then responded to how he felt. And, he became what he was. And yeah, in the next book, I think you're going to see what he's capable of. And it's going to, there is something that is coming that I have already written it. And it was hard to write because it was something that I knew had to happen. Because again, you're dealing with beings that have nearly absolute power. They don't, because the ancients are the ones who do. But they're powerful enough that when push comes to shove and they lash out, they're going to do so in a way that is just like, I feel like would stun somebody a bit. But like, again, because, he, Polis is, I feel like, probably one of the most complicated characters I've written because he wasn't always like this. But like, that those little parts of him that may have still been good, they were only there because he thought Sera was Satora.
Yeah.
And they're not there anymore. So, you're now going to see more of what he's like.
Oh my
love
But
God.
also there was that point in the end. And when Sera said that, like, she saw a look of like resignation.
Yeah.
And that what she wasn't seeing, there was a look of there, because I still think, because I feel like, again, that's a psychology background. Even when someone's narcissistic, even when someone, again, a psychopath is somebody, again, it's extremely rare. And there's a different term for that. There's there's that little part that they, like, the ones who look like they act like they want to be called. Because there's that tiny part in them that they also, in their minds, it feels like they can't control what they're doing. But they want it to be done. And, and so that's, kind of like my fascination of that, where it came from, because there's that, they know what the difference between right and wrong. They're not really happy with what they're doing. And, I wanted to kind of show that Polis, but yeah, like what she saw was that moment of almost relief where he was like, it's over. Because at that point, he still believed that was Satora and he knew what was going to happen.
Yeah.
And, because I thought in my mind too, was like a bit, because it is a bit of a mind fuck for the character itself, even for me as I'm writing it, because I didn't plan for that as I was writing it. As something kind of came to me, but I was like, no, I think there've been a part of him just like, it's over finally. And then, but it's not. And, so it's that.
Oh my God. Well, I
didn't
can't
reassure
wait.
you at all.
Gird my loins. I'm like, oh God.
Listeners obviously can't see our faces, but that whole time Kelly's like, oh no, and my face is like, oh yes.
Well, and here's the thing
Drama.
though. You will see what Polis is capable of. And you will now see why Sera's name is not spoken in the mortal realm. Because Sera, I don't think a lot of people realize this. Sera is the anti-hero of the series. She's not particularly a good person. Sera is relatable though. She's relatable. However, she can kill with little remorse.
Yeah.
And
that's true.
And she even talks about it. Have her talk about where she's like, I don't feel the guilt like Ash does. I don't carry it like he does. I kind of like, oh, that sucks. Okay, well, I'm good. How about y'all? Like, it's she, and she is, in my mind, she is the anti-hero, and she would have been a better primal of death than she would have been a primal of life. Yeah. But I do that kind of also on purpose, because life, I feel like, is more vicious. Like it's harder. It is, you got to survive life to kind of submit to death type of thing. And there was a purposeful way I'm doing that, where death is what you should not be afraid of. It's life, because death is the absence of choice. It's the end, but life is the continuation of that. And it's so, I just feel like her character probably still would have made a better primal death than a primal life. But because she has a vindictive streak in her, and she has a like, the difference between her and Poppy is very forgiving, very loving. Wants to always think there's a bit of hope. Sera, on the other hand, no, not really. It's like, she'll give you a chance, but it ain't a long one. And if she is the type that I think would strike first too, if she thought that you could gain upper hand. And there is a bit of that struggle you're going to see with her in the final book, where she, she feels like she needs to be different to be what she is, kind of thing. And there's a little bit of struggle there, because I feel like she would, be kind of thinking what I'm saying, which is, well, I kind of make a shitty primal life here. It's like, I'm very impulsive and very bad temper.
Something I want to quickly ask, I don't know if you can answer it, but I'll try anyways. At the very end of A Fire in the Flesh, well, okay, first I got to backtrack. At the very end of A Soul of Ash and Blood, Cass transforms into a large cat, just like Poppy's dad is able to. At the very end of A Fire in the Flesh, Sera sees a large cat while she's like kind of in stasis, but like reawakening of sorts.
Yeah.
Can you
She's
tell
trying to wake up.
us who this cat
Yes.
may be?
That's her. She's seeing, I mean, it is kind of a spoiler, but I mean, I feel like you read between
Yes.
the lines, you can see that she's seeing her noda, her notum or notiform. And she saw something else in that. That is like a spoiler a bit. But she's seeing so she is the one who kind of is, transfers down the bloodline. That and and a lot of people had asked, like, well, how did Cass, because when they did the joining, it transferred everyone's abilities among one another. And at the beginning of a soul, if you read closely in the present point, both Karen and Cass were starting to pick up on emotions of Poppy.
Yes.
And they just didn't recognize that they were reading her emotions. And so her abilities are kind of coming back to them, and Cass was able to shift because of Karen's ability. And so, and then he shifted into, that doesn't necessarily mean that's what Poppy's going to be able to shift into. But yeah, it's coming down again from like kind of like the bloodline of what they shift in. So
okay,
that's where you kind of see those interconnections there.
I love that.
Ooh. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because we were talking about that, and I was like, "It's Malik. They're gonna converge the series." I wasn't even thinking, "Duh." When you say that, I'm like, "Oh, of course. That makes so much sense."
And I the poor thing is for the two brothers, Eris and Malik, like they gosh, like I feel like they're you see the twins throughout the books, right? You have Ethos and Colas, you have those two, and Malik is not bad. I think he gets a bad rep. He was just the wilder of this two, right? He didn't want to, and again, you learn. I mean, I think you realize this already, that like they were basically told that they could not have children. Like there's a reason for that. Like they they couldn't. It wasn't really wise for them to go into the mortal realm, because they lose power, and they're also exposed just to more life. And the gods are fascinated with mortals because they live life so passionately because they have such a shorter time. And I mean, he's not a bad guy. He just got caught up. And and again, we're not talking about that, but it's like Isbeth. It's like she wasn't bad originally. Like she wasn't always the way she was. And she's another case of she was shaped by what was done to her, and then her anger. It's like when you don't let go of your anger, it rots you out from the inside. And then she became who she was because of these factors. And so it's like, you see that a little bit there, but yeah, but I would, those two, poor Eris and like I feel like they just kind of gotten the shitty end of the deal there.
At one point in the book, Sera remembers that Ethos said that one of his powers as the primal of life is his extremely good intuition. Is this possibly an Easter egg for Fall of Ruin and Wrath and Callista's abilities? And are we seeing the start of a JLA multiverse?
So, okay. So I don't know how much you want me to be honest. So when does this episode air? That is the question.
Whenever you would like, I guess. We were thinking it like
so yes, it's not a multiverse. It's not a multiverse because I am not smart enough to do it in a multiverse. But here's the thing. Yes, it's an Easter egg. There are similarities there that people probably started to pick. I thought they were obvious. Apparently they weren't in Fall of Ruin and Wrath. But the Witchwoods, they should sound a little bit familiar. They don't, there's reference to like them bleeding, but they don't look like the Blood Forest. The Highborns, in the very beginning of Fall and Ruin Wrath, and again, I wasn't very obvious about this. The Highborns had another name. It was only mentioned once, and that was Ancients. They were known as Ancients.
Oh yeah.
Yes. It's like, and again, I did that on purpose because of the way it was written. You could see it as them just, they're ancient. They've always been here. So Then in A Fire in the Flesh, when Sera is ascending and she sees the stars fall and bury into the ground, and then she sees them face off with the dragons, and before they were Draken. But if you realize, like, remember when she's looking, she sees the eyes and they're multicolored swirls and they have stars in them. That's the same eyes as the highborns. They have multicolored eyes. And she then says that she knows that those who went to ground, it's it's literally in that scene. She says they will wake as blood and bone, the ruin and wrath of the once great beginning.
Yeah.
And then she says she saw in lands separated by sea, where great steel towers once stood, and these ancients woke in those lands, and they toppled they toppled the towers, they toppled everything. That is what they did in Fall of Ruin and Wrath. Now, there is, I'm like, how much of this should I say? It's not a multiverse, but
Okay.
I will say that it's not a multiverse. And if you really want to know afterwards, I'll tell you. But you actually you in Born of Blood and Ash, Sera remembers that, because also I don't know if you caught who the ancients were in that book, who the ancients are in Flesh and Fire, because some of them are still awake. And they're also
Yeah.
known as the one thing that even the primals don't mess with,
Mm-hmm.
and that is fate. The fates are the ancients that stayed away. That's why the fates are more powerful than the primals. That's why the
Yeah.
primals don't mess with.
Oh,
Yes. And so, and again, in Born of Blood and Ash, you will get, like, Sierra kind of, it was like a digital download, right? So she's got all this information coming to her, and it takes her a minute to be like, wait, what? And so you definitely learn more about where is Fall of Runerak, where
Mm-hmm.
is this kingdom. And it's not a multiverse, but there is going to be something that you will notice, probably in Visions and in Born of Blood and Ash. You will see slight changes to the map where they kind of spread out, and you begin to see what, and they've always been there. It just probably you wouldn't have ever noticed that at the edges of the maps there was something there that kind of looked like could be waves or be mist. And so finally the map pulls out and you start seeing the other lands that are there. But
Oh my
it's
God.
explained why these two worlds don't necessarily seem aware of one another, but and also that the gods would know, like that
Yeah.
there's something that they have stayed away from, kind of thing. Because in Fall, Ruin, and Wrath, I always also approached it is as if it was our world at one point that
Mm-hmm.
that we kind of aided in destroying by
Mm-hmm.
digging where we shouldn't have been. But there was also another reason why they woke. And that reason is actually said in A Fire and Flesh when they talk about balance and what Polis wanted to become.
Mm-hmm.
And so you will in the next book really see that come together more. But yeah, people are slowly putting that together, because I think, like, I got a little tricky with people when they would
Mm-hmm.
ask. I always said they're not a part of the same series. I never said they were never part of the same world. So I mean,
Yes.
I was like doing like one of those like technicalities, but they for the most part they stand completely alone. But
Mm-hmm.
it was something that I was kind of thinking about when I developed it. Like, you know, like, oh, that'd be kind of cool. Um, that these, because especially in Fall Rain and Wrath, when Thorn says we've been known by many things throughout history. We were once called gods, angels, the fae,
Mm-hmm.
elementals. They are the myth behind the legends, or they not the myth, but they are the truth behind them. And they are more powerful. They're the most powerful. Like, they created life. They created the realms. It's kind of like the Big Bang. So they are the Big Bang that created
Mm-hmm.
everything. And so yeah. So I am excited about that, because when I do see people starting to figure that out, they're just like, "What?" And yeah.
Yeah. Well, when we heard we were going to talk to you, I was like, hey, wait a sec. we're going to have to ask this because is it just me? Am I losing my mind? Am I making something into something that it's not? Like,
No, you're catching little Easter eggs in there.
Well, okay. Since the soul of Ash and Blood gave us Castile's point of view, I would like to know, will we ever get to see Nyktos's perspective in Born of Blood and Ash, potentially?
Yes, you will see
Ooh.
something. It's not
Okay.
going to be like a full POV switch. But that book is written just a tad bit different, and it's a little like like atypical how I did it, but I felt it made sense, and so you do get to see a little bit from his POV in that
Okay. I'm so
Nice.
excited. Oh my God. I always love getting like sneak peeks into other people's minds because,
Yeah. And it's fun sometimes to like write that. It's like, it forces you to switch like how you would write it. And I do like writing like the guy's perspective.
Mhm.
And because they do have different thought patterns. And so like, it is fun writing that. And also I think it gets to show you too like what they may be thinking during like a pivotal moment or when it really can't make sense for me to show what Sera, for example, would be going through. And showing
Mhm.
it from another perspective.
Right.
Mhm.
So we have one last question for you before we wrap up. You've announced the title for the next book in the series, Born of Blood and Ash. Will this book be the grand finale, or can we hope for another book or two?
So, Born of Blood and Ash is the final book in the Flesh and Fire series. Then after that, the Primal Blood and Bone comes out, and that
Yes.
is the shit 7, 6. I don't know. The Visions, the Compendium throws everything off. That is the final book that Poppy and Cass, or Poppy really but
Okay.
Poppy and Cass and them are the main characters. It's the final book there, but there is one more that I have confirmed, and people forget I confirm it. So sometimes I pretend like I didn't confirm it. So I just I completely just add to the chaos of it. Because I have confirmed it multiple times. Is the final book in that series is Millicent and Malik is the final book. Yeah.
Oh.
Because I like Millicent. I had to because Millicent I think is
Yes.
probably one of the closest characters to me. Um, and I think she's more closer to Sera. I mean, they both
Yeah.
cannot sit in a chair correctly to save their lives. But Millicent, I think, is also just a bizarre, fun character. Like I look forward to writing that because I think I'm just gonna have a lot of fun with her because she's just
Oh my
she's
goodness.
completely
Yes.
unpredictable.
Oh my God. I feel like I never heard that. Where am I looking? I'm
Yeah,
so excited.
honestly, I feel like I confirmed it a while ago, and then like people either forgot or didn't see it, so then I stopped confirming it at some point. I don't know, like it just like what mood I'm in that day, and then I'm like,
Yeah.
baby,
We've got the inside scoop, everyone.
you got the correct answer for me this time.
Oh my goodness. Well, that wraps up this amazing episode. A huge thank you to Jennifer L. Armentrout for joining us today and giving us the inside scoop on herself and her wonderful works. It has been so great to chat with you today, and we really hope we can do it again sometime. To stay in the loop on all of Jennifer's latest releases and upcoming novels, you can visit her website, jenniferlarmentrout.com, or follow her on Instagram at Jennifer_L_Armentrout. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the BYOB podcast. If you enjoyed this and want to hear more from us, you can follow us on Instagram at BYO Book Podcast or TikTok at Bring Your Own Book Podcast to keep up to date on all things BYOB. Until next time, keep on drinking in great stories. Cheers!